members and friends of Washington Avenue Christian Church, disciples of Christ, thank you for inviting me and so many who have loved Nathan Russell for so long to be part of this beautiful weekend. I bring you greetings and gratitude from several, including Galileo Christian Church, disciples of Christ, in the suburbs of Fort Worth, Texas. Our reading from the New Testament for this afternoon is from the second canonized letter of Paul to the Corinthian church, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, several verses, and then a couple from chapter 4. Since then we have such a hope. We act with great boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. Therefore, since it is by God's mercy that we are engaged in this ministry, we do not lose heart. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. For an old dude, Moses had incredible calves. Glutes, too. I mean, really, just in tip-top shape all over, head to toe, with the cardiovascular system of a man half his age, which would have been about 60. We're told at the end of Deuteronomy that Moses lived to be over 120, and that he was fit till the day he died, that his eyesight was clear, that his vigor had not abated, wink, wink, nod, nod, if you know what I mean. But really, I just think the storytellers wanted to comment on what kind of shape that man had to be in to maintain the climbing of the mountain again and again and again. You know, God has a thing for mountains. Maybe you've noticed. As one ascends into the thinner atmosphere of the highest peaks, one gets a little closer to heaven, at least in the ancient imagination that postulated a three-tiered universe with Earth stretching out on a flat plain to its edges, deep darkness below, God's realm above. And if you wanted to hear God's voice, if you expected God to hear yours, getting a little higher, a little nearer to God's celestial abode could not hurt. Morning after morning, Moses made that trek up Sinai, entering the misty atmosphere, hiking into the cloud that contained God, was God. Let himself be enveloped in God, inhaling and exhaling the very presence of God in the humidity. And evening after evening, Moses clambered back down, sometimes with stone tablets, sometimes with only his memory, to report all that he had learned up there. His brother Aaron, his sister Miriam, waited at the bottom, more or less patiently, with all the people that they had led together from enslavement into liberation. On the way up, Moses prayed the way we text each other in traffic. On my way, a little late, see you soon. On the way down, he prayed, please, just don't let them have made another golden calf while I was gone. Because sometimes they did. Those beautiful babies who didn't know from freedom. Sometimes they put their heads together and pooled all their anxieties about the unmanageability of God, about the unpredictability of their circumstances, God can be a liberator of persons, and a truly free God is terrifying. Out of their fears, they cast idols to what they thought would be better for them, monuments to certainty and clarity and control. And here would come Moses, huffing and puffing his way down the mountain to give his report. Thus says the Lord. And for a minute, their fears would rest, and they would remember again that God was never very far from them, that they were on God's mind very much of the time, that whatever future they had lay in God's hands, that God had been trustworthy thus far. And down would come the idol of the day, back into the fire from whence it came, as Moses talked on. Really, if you wanted to pin down Moses' job description, that was pretty much it. Moses talked. Moses talked with God. Moses talked with the people. Exodus 34 says it 7 or 8 times in just 6 verses. Verse 29, his face shone because he had been talking with God. Verse 31, he talked with Aaron and the other leaders. Verse 32, he talked with all the people, telling them what he had talked about with God. Verse 34, after talking with the people, on goes the veil. Before talking with God, off comes the veil. Verse 35, talking with the people, talking again with God, veil on, veil off. This was his routine. And though it is not part of the text we read for today, we remember that Moses was not simply God's transcription service for getting information to the Israelites. There were occasions that the talking went both directions, right? Moses bringing news to God of the Israelites' hardships. Moses reminding God of promises made, not yet kept. Moses complaining to God about the massive triangulation of himself and God and the people of God. Oh, God spoke from that cloud. Yes, God did, but God also listened. And so it went for days and weeks and seasons. Moses and God conversating in the cloud, working out what it would mean for these people to be God's people. Working out what it would mean for God to be their God. It's not a bad job if you can get it. Now, about that veil. It shows up in both passages this afternoon, both from Exodus and 2 Corinthians, and that veil is mysterious in both places. Apparently, being in the full-on presence of God is a tad bit irradiating. Think Jesus on another mountain many centuries later, bright, shining as the sun. And after several trips into the God cloud, Moses' face showed signs of repeated exposure. Was he then simply too bright to look at, reflecting literal illumination to his human conversation partners such that they needed a sun shield to endure it? The text simply says that Aaron and the rest of the Israelites were afraid to come near him when he looked like that. So he covered it up as best he could, perhaps borrowing a niqab from his wife or his daughters, a kind of headscarf to wrap around the face and neck for the sake of modesty. And in this way, he protected the people from seeing too much, knowing too much. Moses, their go-between. Moses, their buffer. When the Apostle Paul gets a hold of that veil, though, as you might expect, he's got a twist to report, a wrinkle. Because it seems to Paul that Moses' veil was not for the sake of hiding God's presence, pouring out through Moses' pores. It was rather for the sake of obscuring the fading of it, the slow but steady disappearance of the divine shine. Moses' face rather like a flashlight with failing batteries, dimmer and dimmer until it goes completely dark. We are not, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3, not like Moses who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. And, yeah, he's good, the apostle, working that angle. Because he's been in some trouble with the Christians in Corinth. They aren't sure they can actually trust him anymore. There's more than one evangelist bending their ears, purporting to speak for the deity of the universe, insisting that theirs is the word of God. And Paul worries that they'll be taken advantage of. Paul worries that the very gospel he has risked everything to preach will be distorted by disreputable dabblers who don't yet understand the full extent of God's power to redeem the world through the life and death and life again of the one man, Jesus. So he calls forward the Corinthians' memory of himself last time he was in town. Honest to a fault. Remember? Hella hard to get along with, yeah. But never tricksy. Never secretive. Never veiled. Because this is how proclaimers of the gospel are, he insists. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. We talk, he says, with God and with you. We talk, he says, for God and for you. Only we do it with our hearts on our sleeve, our faces bare, unveiled, so that you can see for yourself whether God is present with us or not. Before I went to seminary, while I waited for my soon-to-be husband to graduate so he could come too, yes, he is a little younger than I am, and I never let him forget it, I killed a year by getting a master's degree in library science. I figured if this ministry thing didn't work out, I could be a very good librarian. The world will always need librarians, I thought. This was before the internet. Some of you will remember. In library school, we read the results of a study in which hundreds of librarians were asked to wear pagers on their waistbands while they were at work. And at random times during the day, for months on end, those pagers would buzz, and the subjects of this study would pause to record in a notebook what they were doing at that very moment. The collected data were meant to reveal what librarians actually do, what librarianship actually is on the ground. Perhaps you'll be disappointed to hear that I don't actually remember what it showed. Perhaps you will not be disappointed. It cannot have been all that exciting. But I have wondered about that study many times since. I mean, if hundreds of clergy were given pagers, well, there's no such thing as pagers anymore, scratch that. If hundreds of clergy were sent texts to their Apple Watches at random times of the day, and then asked to snap and send a quick photo of whatever they were doing right that second for days on end, season after season, what would the data show? What do we actually do? What is ministry on the ground? If you install a pastor in a local congregation, say, if you say to him, this is your place now, these are your people, what does that mean for how he will spend the days of his life among you? Here is one thing I know for sure. Despite what Paul says, many of the minister's hours among you will be veiled. It is an invitation to capital M mystery, to be called into God's service, to be called alongside God's people. Plenty of the requirements of that calling are quite private. The quiet hours of study, the twin disciplines of prayer and meditation, the long silence of listening before the storm of writing that is preaching, the careful attention to the stories people tell in the privacy of the pastor's study, or whispered quickly at the back of the sanctuary at the end of another Sunday service. None of this work is public. Shareable. How would one say what one is doing when one is sitting quite still, letting one's spirit roam over the deep, lifting one's beloveds and all their stories into the light, listening for God's own whispered assurances? How does one describe the waiting, the watching, the wanting that precede every encounter with God's own Spirit? How does one report to the people what happened on the mountain today? Or report to the deity what happened on the ground the day before? I would add to this a caution that in the cases where the congregation cannot bear the mystery, let me be plain, where the minister's hours must all be accounted for, his expenditures of energy approved of, there is temptation for him to drift toward the work that can be easily appreciated, the work that is public, the work that yields measurable results, the work that requires no veil because there is so little transcendence in it. The overscheduled pastor will have little time or energy for mountain climbing. His calves and his sermons will grow soft. His face will fade. Because the glory of the Lord is invitational. It waits. God waits to be heard and to hear. God will not bully God's way into a church or even a sermon. God hovers. God holds. The life of ministry at its best heeds the call away from the busyness and the business of the church to meet God where God will be found, and then be still. Here is something else I know for sure. Unveiled transparency is the essential disposition of the minister toward his church. Yes, I know this is the opposite of what I just said. It is a paradox. I cannot resolve it. I only know that if I wore a pager and recorded the happenings of any given day doing this work, some ghastly percentage of instances would find me split wide open, raw and real, spilling out all the grace I have been given on the chance that the beautiful, hurting, or hurtful person standing right in front of me has not gotten enough of it yet. I would record my confessions of not having the answers to life's biggest questions. I would record the disappointment and relief on various faces when I confess that my faith kisses doubt every morning of the world. I would record the stuff I invent to keep me busy and bound to the ground so I have an excuse not to climb that mountain today. I would record the heartfelt apologies I have learned to make for the sometimes clumsy, sometimes cruel trespasses I chronically commit. I would record my frustration that the people I love remain broken even when I have worked so hard to fix them. I would record my fear that the church is failing, falling. I would record my panic that the gospel is everywhere misrepresented, that charlatans preaching prosperity or shoveling shame are winning the day. I would record my helplessness and hopelessness, my ego and exhaustion, my pride, my prejudice. I would show it all. my beloveds, my unveiled face, no trickery, no hiding. Because this is the work. The veiling and unveiling, on the mountain, on the ground, highs and lows, the glory of the Lord imprinted on the inglorious human beings whom the Lord has called. Nathan, this is your work. At the intersection of mystery and transparency, the climbing up and the coming down, the set-apartness and the radical witness. And since I have known you, I have spoken to the deity on your behalf. I have lifted you into the irradiating light of God's presence, asking that you might join the ranks of those for whom this work does not guarantee happiness, but who will never be happy doing anything else. Welcome to the work, my brother, my friend, my fellow worker. May your calves stay strong. May your face shine with all the glory God reveals. May your life be a gift of transparency to those whom God has given you. And may your body and soul and spirit be kept sound and blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful. God will do.